we say, lots to discuss. And our top story is General Motors seeks to lead the US in electric vehicle cells. In technology, here are 5 recent advances that are changing everything we thought we knew about electronics. And now in space, after 3.5 million years, we went around then, after 3.5 million years, the largest comet ever discovered is heading our way. For the environment, the fossil fuel industry gets subsidies of $11 million a minute, according to the IMF. In animals, there are genius dogs that have exceptional learning capacities. Maybe we need to learn from them. For us in our brains, here's the logic about the brain's second brain, maybe the first one, but anyway, the second brain, the gut brain. And on medical stuff, the malaria vaccine is apparently a breakthrough for science, the WHO chief says. So that's what we'll discuss today. And now, Richard, what's this in our top story? The General Motors sets to lead the US in electric vehicle sales.
Well, this is a enormous change for a big company in the US and a big company that in some ways has not been doing as well. GM now plans to cash in on the switch in the world from internal combustion engines to battery power. And they say they're going to double their annual revenue by 2030, taking advantage of the move to EVs. They also are absolutely planning to unseat Tesla and become the biggest EV manufacturer in the US. And there are many parts of this plan. One of the things that they announced basically at the same time is they have several new EV models. One is going to be a small Chevrolet SUV that'll cost about $30,000, still a lot, as well as electric trucks. And they are working on a Chevy Blazer electric SUV and a smaller vehicle at a lower price tag. So they understand 30,000 is more than people have to pay for a car. And they plan to increase their investment in EV charging stations. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about their plan is they think at the same time they're doing all of this, that they'll be able to raise their pre-tax profit margins from the 8% it is now to 12%. So their plan is to revolutionize their building, their product line, and everything they manufacture, and at the same time increase their share of market and increase their profitability. That's a lot to do at once. And you know, the thing is that while they make a lot of cars, they don't make much in the way of EVs, except ones that they developed and pulled off the market, 30 years ago. But anyway, so it's a big deal. Now, a part of the plan is their cruise autonomous vehicles subsidy. And you haven't heard much of this except some reports and that they're planning to roll out, and they're going to roll out their first driverless ride-hailing system soon, they say, in San Francisco, which is not an easy place to get around. And they think Cruise will ramp up quickly and become a $50 billion company. And by 2023, they're going to introduce an almost driverless system. They say it can do 95% of the driving tasks on some Cadillacs. And by 2025, GM is spending $35 billion to roll out more than 30 new battery vehicles. And by 2035, they say they will have completely converted to EVs and no longer make gas passenger cars. And so big changes are afoot in the automobile business, and GM is showing real bold announcements, I think, to ride the wave of the new change. We'll still see how they do. It's an ambitious plan, and a lot of the skills that they need in this new market are not skills that they have. So we'll see.
Any thoughts?
Well, one of the things that they want to do is to unseat Tesla. And, Tesla is really doing very little in terms of marketing and advertising. And in spite of that, I think their most recent sales are like 500,000 cars. And Tesla is based strictly on their development of electric cars and all the novelties that go with it. And GM is just making a lot of big noise. Whether they can live up to it is
John
really
is
quite
right that
questionable.
they're making a lot of noise, and we had a story on GM some time ago here in Hard Science that of all their plans to convert to EVs. But I've looked at their share price over 6 months. It hasn't really showed up. Like you don't see investors as excited as they should be, maybe.
And GM in the last year has lost market share also. So it's been a tough time for them. The EV chip shortage reduced their production last quarter by about 1/3. So they're having tough times, but they still have big plans. I give them credit myself for thinking big.
Yeah, I watched an excellent video on YouTube, and the big problem is charging stations. And in Europe, they have decided what kind of plug-in you need, and it's standardized. Whereas in North America, there are 3 different ones. Tesla has one, GM has another, and so on. And, the government needs to step in and standardize. Then we don't need so many charging stations. And apparently you're able to get a recharge in half an hour. And I would consider that acceptable, even for driving all the way from Western Canada to Mexico.
They're also, you're certainly right about recharging stations. Part of GM's announcement is that they're going to be investing in charging stations. Also, I haven't talked about it here. One of the recent articles I read, though, is of yet another new battery technology that can recharge 100 miles worth in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Besides the station argument is not really all wrong, because most cars, particularly private cars, are used for running errands in the neighborhood, and you would charge it up in your own garage overnight, most likely. And go anywhere between 400 kilometers on one charge. So, you know, I don't think that cross-country driving is that, you know, except among drugs.
Yeah, I think if you're just thinking about commuting, going to work, or calling on clients, you know, that can be handled with the current technology. It's only if you want to do a cross-continental trip, you know, and I like to be able to do that. I've always done long drives.
So you'll just have to use a charging station at a restaurant.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, you know, if you can get, say, 400, they say you can get like 450 kilometers and then half hour's charge and another 450. Well, hey, it takes me longer than half an hour to eat lunch.
Richard, what's this about in electronics? About there being some recent changes that are changing everything we know.
Well, changing everything we know is kind of the period that we're in electronics. And the thing is, in our modern world, almost everything that we encounter relies in some ways on electronics. And every device we've developed in electronic really consists of only a few simple components that are put together in different kind of ways to do the remarkable range of things that we see. And so for most of the last century, what we've relied on in electronics is a voltage source. That would either be battery or from the power lines, a resistor, lots of resistors, often capacitors, and inductors. And then with the semiconductor revolution, that was based on one more component, a transistor, which is the switch that turns on and off, 1 or 0. And that's basically brought us everything that we use today. And as we have done this, these items are by standards now big and bulky and use a lot of power. And so we're trying to figure out how to make them smaller and more energy efficient. And there presently are 5 advances that are coming together that they say will further transform our modern world. And transform is a pretty big word. And I'm going to go through those 5 here. The first is the development of graphene. And graphene was only found in 2004. So it hasn't been, we haven't known about it for a long time. It was actually isolated by accident. You know how this works with science. Sometimes what you get is not what you're looking for, and sometimes what you get is more interesting than what you're looking for. Anyway, so graphene has a bunch of things going for it. Among them is it's the hardest material ever. It's a lot harder than diamonds. And then it has resistance to physical, chemical, and heat stress, and has this perfect atomic lattice that we see in all the pictures of the hexagons. And then graphene also has interesting properties about conducting electricity. And it really means that if electronic devices, including transistors, could be made out of graphene instead of silicon, they could be a lot smaller and faster than anything we have today. And then besides this, if you do things like mix graphene into plastic, the plastic becomes stronger, more heat resistant, and can conduct electricity. Also, graphene is almost entirely transparent. So that gives it interesting things in the optic areas, like maybe new touch screens and even solar cells. And so we're on the verge with graphene of yet another miniaturization of electronics that will lead to computers and everything else being smaller, faster, more energy efficient. But things can only get smaller if you can make these other kinds of components smaller as well. And so that's part of what this article is about. So besides graphene, the next thing that is significant is surface mount resistors. Resistors are one of the components. We all may know the things from the old day that look like tubes with little pins coming out of both ends. Those were resistors. They have colored stripes on them to tell you the value. Anyway, surface mount resistors are these little tiny rectangular objects. They're made of ceramic and actually have better performance than the traditional resistors. And they're small and they can be put in automated assembly very easily. So that's resistors. The next component was capacitors, and now they have supercapacitors, and recent advances in material have enabled capacitors to store much more energy in a smaller space. And so they can charge and discharge more rapidly, so can operate at higher speeds, and can store up to 100 times more energy in the volume. So these supercapacitors, as well as the surface mount resistors, are making things smaller. The next part of it is a superinductor. And these were the last of these classes of the basic components that were developed, and these were only developed in 2018. So superinductors are only about 3 years old. Before this, the inductors was basically a coil of wire, some kind of current, and a magnetizable core that would make it all work together and do its job. The problem with the old inductors is the value of the inductant depends upon the surface area of the inductor, which is impossible to miniaturize. But now they have another approach that's called kinetic inductance, and they have been able to use this to develop inductor technology out of our friend graphene and develop the highest inductance density material ever created. So we have now the next generation of superinductors. And then the last trick is putting graphene into any device. You know, they've tried a lot of different approaches with this, but what seems to work the best is laser engraved graphene. And so if you take, for example, polyamide, a kind of high temperature plastic, and pattern graphene directly into it with lasers, then you can make shapes and circuits and components as you need to in the device to be able to basically do anything you want. And they think some examples that will come out of this will be tiny wearable electronic devices that power themselves that you could use for things like COVID diagnosis, or to monitor your heart, or to monitor your brain. And I guess they could be the computer brain interfaces even. And then also with this laser engraved graphene, you can make things that can harvest and store electricity. And while we were talking about all of these technical developments that underlie a lot of the miniaturization, if you come to batteries, basically the way we store electric energy now with dry cell chemical batteries is a technology that's centuries old. But it looks like with this laser engraved graphene that we can make things, among other things we can do with it, is to be able to make a new generation of batteries. And also we can use it to do things like make photovoltaic devices, solar cells that look like they're more efficient than current approaches. So there is so much that we're going to be able to do with this together. And the thing about laser engraved graphene is this allows simple mass production of high quality, inexpensive graphene circuits for a lot of applications. And you know, one of the things they keep talking about but hasn't gone much into the marketplace are on-skin electric devices for health monitoring and things like this. And so all of these together are revolutionary. It'll mean not only, say, a smaller computer and a more powerful cell phone, it also will, these wearable devices that will have built into them the diagnostic telemedicine capabilities. So you're basically wired in, all the chip is monitoring your vital signs 24 hours a day. And when there's any problem, they send a signal out and you get the kind of immediate attention you need. So this is the future we have coming in electronics, and it's not just from miniaturizing the semiconductors, the transistors, those devices, but we're also able to miniaturize all the other kind of components that are needed to make complex electronics. So it's a new day that's coming.
Any thoughts?
Well, I'm wearing one of those devices that you're talking about, except it doesn't send out the signal if something goes wrong. But my heart rate, for instance, gets too high or too low. There's apparently parameters. The thing literally bites me. I got it on my wrist, you know.
Okay.
And it has, when I take it off, it has on the back monitors. I don't know if you can see that.
Okay, I can see.
Yeah, see, and at night it's actually it lights. Anyway, it works like it shorts out or something. You know, when for instance my heartbeat gets, you know, I have a problem with tachycardia, and so if I exercise and or whatever reason, it just alerts me of it, and the doctor tells me when that happens.
But here with that, it's not wireless, so it doesn't communicate with anything else, and it needs a battery. And so both of those, right?
It has a battery probably, but you charge it up with a little magnetic thing
Right.
you plug in, and it takes about maybe 20 minutes.
So it's rechargeable. These things will somehow use like the motion of your body to generate electricity. So you're not going to need batteries either. And
No.
then it'll connect to the web.
Yeah, and it does connect to the web, and I can tell because it also gives the time. And
Okay. Okay.
it works like a watch. You know, you have to sort of. I don't know if you can see that. I mean, it.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. There we are. Right.
see. And,
Uh-huh. So
some-
you're one of the leader in this new wearable technology. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's.
And I think what his demonstration shows what this is happening. Yes, sir, Clive.
Yes, I've got one of those as well. And
Okay.
it does everything that John says it does. I charge it up by shoving it in the USB port on my computer. And an hour's charge, it will last for 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's very easy.
Yeah.
The only thing, though, this is a warning maybe for you, John.
We couldn't hear you when you're giving the warning, Clive. We missed the most important part, John's warning.
Old-fashioned way.
Great Clyde.
But yeah, it does all those things. If I bring it in the vicinity of my phone, it resets itself. It syncs with the phone.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, mine reacts to the internet, and if I get away from where the internet signal is, it'll work. But after a little while, it gives time. Okay, I think 15 in the morning, no matter what time it is, and and then I know this thing is no longer working properly, and then in front of my computer, and it automatically resumes computer time and everything else, but works properly. So I don't know.
Good.
Anyway, just so in case somebody's interested, Amazon sells these things, and here in Mexico, your cost is about 700 pesos. So it's
Inexpensive. Okay, very good. And I didn't realize what advanced fellows we have. I should know, but I didn't.
Richard, if we want to talk about recent advances and then say, no, let's talk about something that's a huge amount away from us. What's this about this comet that is coming our way that we haven't seen for 3.5 million years?
Well, I don't think we saw it the last time it passed in our neighborhood either, but because it was a while back. And so it's an enormous comet that is coming our way, possibly the biggest one ever detected. And it's barreling towards the inner solar system, and it's going to arrive in about 10 years. And this comet, which is known as BB or Bernstein Comet, is about 100 kilometers across. So it's big. That's about 1,000 times more massive than a typical comet. They didn't discover it until June of this year. So they figured out its orbit. And so the last time it was around us was 3.5 million years ago. And when they discovered it, you've heard outside the solar system, there is this enormous Oort cloud. and there's a bunch of stuff in it, and we really don't know what is in it. And so they found it coming through the Oort cloud, rapidly headed our way. Now they say, don't worry, it doesn't pose a threat to the Earth. It'll go around the orbit of Saturn, is as close as it will get. And even though it's the biggest comet ever, it'll be far enough from the Earth that you won't be able to see it without a telescope. But this is, one of the kind of issues that we have is there's all of these rocks floating around us in our solar system. And like this one, the biggest one ever, we didn't know about until June. And we don't know what else is out there waiting for us, except we know something is, and we hope we just see it in time. By the way, the US in the next, shortly in the future, will be testing their first mission where they run a spaceship into an asteroid to see how far they can nudge it. So we start to develop some tools, so in case of trouble, we can move a future comet out of our way. So that's it on the cometary front.
Any thoughts?
Well, it's kind of scary, if things might just not work quite well. I mean, I understand this particular comet will come as close as 10 astronomical units. And, in the EU is 1 EU is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. It'd be 10 times as far away as the Sun, and it just crosses the orbit of Saturn. It doesn't become part of its orbit. It will
Right.
go through it. And but I don't know, if we could land a spaceship and then what are they going to use to nudge the thing in a different direction? And if so, this thing might get out of its own orbit, and then they just have the opposite effect. I don't know. There's nothing there to push against.
We'll find out. We'll find out.
Well, yeah, I guess.
When is this going to be close to Earth?
It's not, the closest it gets is to Saturn, and it'll be about 10 years from now.
Now, John finds it somewhat scary to have these comets around, but Richard is implying that an even scarier thing is the amount of subsidy we give to the fossil fuel industry. Apparently, $11 billion a minute. What's that about?
Well, that is about trouble. We have trouble, right, friends, right here in River City. And the fossil fuel industry benefits from enormous subsidies. And the International Monetary Fund recently published an analysis, and their analysis found that the production and burning of coal, oil, and gas was subsidized to the tune of $5.9 trillion last year. So repeat that, $5.9 trillion subsidy for coal, oil, and gas. And experts, of course, warned that these subsidies were adding fuel to the fire at a time when rapid reduction in carbon emissions is urgently needed. And the subsidies that they looked at some amount, a small amount, 8% of the subsidies are basically price supports for fuel in different forms, and another 6% are tax breaks. The biggest factor, though, was that polluters do not pay for the deaths and poor health conditions caused by air pollution. Those costs are borne either by individuals or by countries' medical systems. And then another enormous area is the costs of heat waves and other impacts that come from global heating. Now, in another report to speak about those impacts, I read a report today that said in the US this year, the cost of these environmental disasters that we continue to have is $2 billion a month. So environmental disasters are not cheap. And so setting fossil fuel prices in a way that reflects their true costs, they say, is one of the things that would cut global CO2 emissions. They think it would cut them by about a third, because if you make them priced at what their real cost is, then that's a powerful incentive for people to figure out how to operate more efficiently or to use a fuel that has fewer impacts and lower costs. If you had things that reflected the real cost, one of the things that would happen would be, for example, it would make electric vehicles a lot more price competitive because the gas cars wouldn't be getting their subsidies. Now, in the nation, the G20 agreed in 2009 to phase out, quote, inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And in 2016, I guess they said we're going to be serious about it. We mean it. And so the deadline is 2025, but no progress basically has been made to actually do this. This is another case where the desires and commitments exceed the actions pretty dramatically. And right now, 5 countries are responsible for 2/3 of these subsidies. And it's China, the US, Russia, India, and Japan. And unless we don't act now, these subsidies will increase to $6.5 trillion by 2025. And so it might be that if we want to change the power system in the world, we need to stop giving $11 million a minute to the fossil fuel industry in support. Imagine what we could do if we spent the same money on green power, for example. So the people who say we don't have the money to make these changes are not paying much attention to the money that we're spending now every day to support not changing. Maybe it's time to change our not changing.
Any thoughts?
As long as we keep electing senators like Joe Manchin, who is a major investor in coal and oil and all that, we will never see those changes. I mean, they will not say this loud, but they will fight tooth and nail, to keep those millions coming to their own pocket.
Yep. Joe Manchin, I've heard, makes $500,000 from his coal investments a year.
Yeah, it's coal.
Coal.
Yeah, but he also into oil and gas.
What we need is big government, but there is, we need big government, but there is a huge section of population that is anathema to them. They really want the opposite, but it.
Isn't
Well,
it
it seems to me that
subsidizing these fossil fuel industries?
sorry, repeat, please.
But in terms of Clive's comment, isn't it government that is subsidizing the industry?
Yes, yes, it is. And us, of course, each of us.
Richard, this article, very interesting, was not in our list.
I know.
Where did you read about it?
It was in the weekly science list. I just forgot it when I made up the list after you sent me an email yesterday evening kicking me. Where's your list?
So it's my fault because I rushed.
No, it's never your fault. It's my fault because I was asleep at the switch. And I put this one on the wrong track.
It's very interesting. It seems that this could be a strong argument for passing the $3.5 trillion.
Yes. Amen. 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 You know, and we could fund it by just cutting the oil subsidies that we presently give. How about that for an idea?
Well, the problem is that we have senators and then a whole party.
Yes, I know.
Well, the Republicans who will not do that. And as long as Americans remain underinformed or not informed or not interested, you know, we're just not going to go anywhere except to hell, I guess.
And, you know, it looks to me like the Republicans are trying their best to disable Biden and make sure that Biden doesn't do as much as he could do, because that way he'll be weaker in 2022 and they'll get more seats. The thing is that we have to make sure that doesn't happen. The Republicans, I think, are depending upon lower Democratic voter turnout in mid-year elections. And the way that we can beat that is to each of us do things to support, for example, voter turnout issues in the US. And it's a big deal.
It's pretty tough in the distance for us.
So we need to actually, the way to take care of the two recalcitrant Democrat senators is to elect a couple of more good progressive Democratic senators and just change the balance.
Yeah. Well, what we should do is clear to
So we're speculating on how we can learn to reduce subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. And perhaps the next story, there might be genius dogs that could show us how to learn to do things like that. What's that all about?
I hope so. I hope you're right. Now, the question that the article starts with is, does your dog understand you? All dogs are smart, but some dogs are uniquely talented in learning words. And here, you know, we all know that dogs can learn words that are connected with actions, such as sit and lay down. But it turns out very few dogs can learn the names of objects. So they're good at learning verbs, but not very good at learning nouns. And so these people for years searched around the world for dogs that had learned the names of their toys. And after several years worth of search, they found 6. That's not a lot, but it's a lot more than 0. And the dogs were from all around the world: Hungary, Brazil, Netherlands, Florida, Norway, Spain. And these dogs typically know the names of more than 28 toys, and some of them knew the names of more than 100. And so now the scientists had some language learning dogs to be able to test and looked at. And what they found is they tried, for example, teaching new names for new toys to these dogs. And they found that they absolutely were able to do it, and they learned it fairly quick. They found they could learn the name for a new toy after it was repeated only 4 times. So pretty fast learning. And so in a new study, they wanted to push the limits of the dog's talent. So they had the owner teach the dogs of new things, first 6 things or then 12 new things in a week. And, you know, for the dog, it was no sweat. They were able to meet this kind of challenge and learn a dozen new things a week. They don't know what the upper limit is, but they learned they could learn a lot. They also saw that after 2 months that the dogs still remembered the names of the new toys, so they were able to learn them and retain their names. And part of what is interesting here was, you know, this was done during the COVID era, so you can't do research in the same way. And so they found a new way of conducting this kind of science and how to take the laboratory into the dog's home. And so they typically would set up 2 video cameras that they had connected to YouTube live stream, and the cameras then let them monitor the dogs and the owner's behavior. And so they had a new way, they figured out in the COVID era, a new way to do this science and do it remotely. They also, it was interesting, all 6 of the dogs that they found initially were all border collies. And we don't know if border collies are the smartest dog breed. They are herding dogs, and they're very sensitive and responsive to the behavior of their owners. But even among border collies, this behavior is still very rare. And what they found out more recently is this talent is not unique to this breed. They found a German Shepherd, a Pekingese, a mini Australian Shepherd, and a few mutts, dogs, mixed breed dogs that could do it. And one of the reasons they're interested in studying these extremely talented dogs is to see if they can understand the factors that lead into this development. And their idea is, if we can learn what makes these dogs so smart, maybe we can apply it and make people smart too. So what do you think?
I don't think that Republicans are ready for it.
Okay. Well, maybe we can teach the Republican dogs.
Uh, dogs respond. Dogs respond.
Okay, go ahead, Clive. Anyway, I was going to say we have a dog. It's I believe it's a Belgian sheepdog, and just about a week ago, on
Yeah.
news, oh, you saw that where the dog
Yeah.
masks, and could tell whether somebody had COVID or not. Well, the reaction is overwhelming.
Okay.
Clive, we couldn't hear you a minute ago.
Yeah, I've had dogs where they respond very much to your tone of voice. So I think that should be part of the research, because we had a dog and you could say, we're going to have you put down, and she would wag her tail.
Well, Richard, I don't know if this thing about genius dogs has anything to do with our important brain, the second brain, the gut brain. What's the logic of all of that?
Well, it's an interesting story. I think I actually, because of other reasons, had been recently studying the gut brain. And one of the things about this part of our nervous system is it's actually the oldest part of our nervous systems. It looks like the way the brain developed was first there were entities that had neurons, these brain elements in their skin. So you imagine this little critter bouncing around and you want to feel when you run into something. So that was the first brain, first place where the brain cells showed up. The next is once they were on the skin, they started to accumulate around the mouths of these tiny critters. And that makes sense because you want to know when you can eat something, right? And then it looks like from the mouths, the brains moved into the stomach. And long before there was a brain on top of the head, there was the brain in the stomach. And so they now we spent a lot of time studying the brain on top of the head, and they now are trying to do a better job of studying this brain in the stomach. And that's really called the enteric nervous system as opposed to the central nervous system. And, most people don't even know we have this brain. And this enteric nervous system actually is remarkably independent of the central nervous system. For example, intestines can carry out their normal duty of digesting food and moving food along in the system, even if they have no connection to the central nervous system. Even if that is cut, your stomach still continues to work because your stomach has its own brain to work it. And the recent studies have shown this enteric nervous system consists of neurons like we know about for the brain, and then another kind of cell called glia cells. And these cells are kind of control the switching and signaling. So I think of them as kind of signaling processing cells. And in this gut brain, it looks like there are about as many brain cells as there are in a cat's brain. So the gut brain has more than 200 million brain cells in it. The head brain has a lot more, it's 16 billion, but 200 million brain cells in my gut is a lot of brain cells in the gut. And one of the things they've learned in this study is these glia cells are a lot more important than they ever knew. And now that they're starting to study them and understand them, for example, one of the things they think is this is going to give them a new way to treat irritable bowel syndrome. And that's something that presently there is no cure for, and it affects 10 to 15% of the people. So it's real common. There also are other health conditions that can be addressed this way. And it, to me, is really pretty amazing that we think we know so much, but here is this other significant part of our nervous system, and we are just learning about it now and starting to explore it and understand it. And so there's much more going on with humans and our nervous systems than we presently understand. I read recently, for example, that there are more than 1,000 different kinds of cells in our brain. And we don't know what they are. We don't know what they do. We don't know how they work, but there's a lot of them. And so I think will keep the brain scientists busy for a while.
Any thoughts? Well, if we don't want to talk about the gut brain, what's this about the malaria vaccine that people think can be really, really important?
Well, malaria affects hundreds or millions of people every year and kills hundreds of thousands of people a year. I think there is not as much focus on malaria as some of these things because most of the malaria cases happen in Africa, and Africa is not as popular or stylish a place. And that one of the things about malaria that is devastating is most of the deaths are of children under 5. So, and it turns out in Africa, malaria is more deadly than COVID. Last year, malaria killed in Africa twice as many people as COVID did. So it is a serious problem. Now, this particular vaccine, it now had gone through years of testing in a large-scale pilot program before the WHO approved it and wanted to target its use for children in Africa. This vaccine, though, was developed in Africa by African scientists, and they are rightfully very proud of their effort. And the vaccine, though, from the standards that we've been hearing about, is really not very good. It has about a 30% effectiveness, 30%. So that is low effectiveness, but that low effectiveness could save the lives of more than 100,000 children a year. So that still is fairly significant. And the scientists who lead this global malaria work say this is how we fight malaria, layering imperfect tools on top of each other. He says that because right now, that's the best we can do. There is, however, new hope on the horizon. There's another vaccine that was developed by the University of Oxford, and it's in early trial stages. They just did a year-long study involving 450 children, and it showed 77% effectiveness, more than twice as effective as the vaccine that just got approved. So that is hopeful. And then biotech, who had partnered with Pfizer for the mRNA COVID vaccine, says they're working on an mRNA malaria vaccine that they think they'll be able to start testing of next year. So it looks like we are starting to have progress in vaccines for malaria. And it seems like since these vaccines protect the lives of your youngest children, they're going to be used. People don't want their babies to die of malaria. And so I think the vaccines will actually be used, unlike the COVID ones, that there are all of these resistors.
Any thoughts?
Well, I wonder if all these vaccines, the effect of it's going to be that the world population will continue to increase. And already as it is, we have a problem with overpopulation. And I think that when these vaccines are being administered, they also should educate people of this fact that, you know, otherwise we might wind up having to eat each other to stay alive.
John, I was interested. I was listening to a TED talk the other day in which it talked about in the 20th century how our population lifespan had doubled. And the main reason for it was vaccines.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Well, the problem isn't population, you could argue. The problem is that within the population, you have this one group that uses a lot of resources and doesn't contribute much to the overall life. That is all these old people. And so we could take care of a lot of the population if we just got rid of them, John.
Well, I think Mother Nature is doing a pretty good job there.
But the problem there is the reason we live so long is not that we're breeding like rabbits, it's that we're no longer dying like flies.
Right. Yep.
Anyway, Richard, thanks once again. Great session. And thanks to everybody for participating. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Bye. Adios. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay.